Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to our 7th lecture in the Graduation Network Skills Development Seminar Series. This is part of our ongoing monthly series where we bring together distinguished scholars from experts both Jordan and UK to share their experience and their journeys. So today session titled Processing and Analyzing Data for Ethnographic and Participatory Research, and will be presented by Dr. Hala Ghanem from the Hashemite University in Jordan. In this lecture, Dr. Hala will introduce the ethnographic and participatory approaches can be integrated into the qualitative data analysis. Now let me introduce our speaker. Dr. Hala Ghanem is an assistant professor at the Architecture Engineering Department at the Hashemite University in Jordan. Her work is deeply focused on public space and the ways which marginalized groups influence the shape urban environment. She used participatory and art-based feminist methods to explore this dynamic and bring often overlooking voices into the conversation. Dr. Ghanem holds her PhD from University of Sheffield and has co-lead several notable projects funded by British Academy and CBRL. She is also worked with the consultant from International Institute for Environment and Development, bringing truly global preservation to her research. And she published several pieces of research already in her field. Before we dive in, just a quick note, today's session is being recorded as a part of our webinar format. We kindly ask everyone to submit any question you may have using the Q&A box. Dr. Hala will be happy to address those questions at the end of the talk. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to engage the productive seminar. Dr. Hala, the floor is all of yours.
Marhaba. Thank you, Dr. Rudaina. Thank you, CBRL, for always being a long partner with me in my career. Today, the session is about ethnography and participatory research. As I told Dr. Rudaina before we started, that I'm talking about this like a very huge two methodologies, let's say, or two approaches. So I'm going to talk about like snapshots of both. I just want to check, Dr. Rudaina and Wara'a, do you see the slides now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So today I'm talking about the significance of both. So the focus today will cover ethnography and participatory research. And just to like summarize, ethnography explores specific social context and their practices. So it provides insights into people's lives and cultures over time. While participatory research involves real collaboration with participants, leading to co-definition of problems and contribute later on to knowledge production and maybe action and practice. I'll start with ethnography. The ethnographic approach, so if we want to understand the genealogy of the word, it's ethnos and graph. So ethnos is people and graph is to write people, so to write about people. It started with a very colonial lens where other, like let's say the white came to study other peoples in Africa and other cultures. And nowadays it's totally different. But I don't perceive ethnography as others perceive it as a method, but it's a qualitative research approach. So in this approach, the researcher enters a social setting, regardless of the scale of this social setting. And the researcher spends extended time, and I'll talk about time later on, observing and participating in everyday activities. Sometimes they only observe, sometimes they participate. So to what extent they participate or not. It depends on the insider-outsider continuum, they call it. So, and then they systematically record observation through field notes and other materials that I'll talk also about later. Then they analyze these materials iteratively to understand how meanings form in these social settings and social relations are produced also in the same settings. As I said earlier, ethnography is an approach, it's not a method. So the researcher or the ethnographer, they commit to study social life, but in context, and over time, and through relational immersion. So when you immerse, you dig deep inside a setting. So within that commitment, methods are chosen instrumentally, and the researcher chooses this method or a set of methods, a hybrid set of methods, depending on what the researcher believes counts as knowledge and whose perspectives matter. So these can include participant observation, interviews, mapping, diaries, visual methods, or archival work, and it could go more and more into more different methods. And usually ethnography is about like very deep observation, but it's not just watching. It has to involve being present as a researcher, and you participate where appropriate, listening carefully, but not only listening to the verbal words, but also paying attention to routines, silences, and absence of words and contradictions. So what matters in ethnography is not only what people say, but what they do and their practices. How do we write and log that? We write it through field notes. And field notes are the primary analytical record of ethnographic research. There are secondary ones, but they are the primary. That's why I'm talking about them now. So field notes are the primary analytical record where you document your observations, your reactions, and sometimes the spatial arrangements in a place that are important and can give dynamics of the whole setting of the inquiry. And also, one important thing to record is the researcher's own positionality, and I'll talk about that later also. Field notes are critical because they don't have to be neutral. So they're not neutral transcripts. They are situated accounts through which the meaning is first produced, refined, and questioned. No. So what are the forms of field notes? We have different and multiple forms of field notes, especially in my expertise. We work on urban settings and cities, and also it's a socio-spatial scope. So we can do sketches of spatial arrangements or movement paths, maps showing informal routes, boundaries, or zones of use. Sometimes it's about social relations and power dynamics and to what extent these relations are strong. Photographs that has to be annotated later because many people use photographs, but they are under-analyzed. And also hybrid pages combining all of them together with arrows, timestamps, and drawings. There are templates of field notes that when you go to the field, you prepare them. But not all of the ethnographers do that. But for beginners, I highly recommend templates of field notes. But there is no single standard template for field notes. We don't have a standard template, but there are some. You can see them in texts. So these forms can change according to the research aims, disciplinary traditions, and field conditions of each project. So I highly recommend that each researcher, if they want field notes, they can look at the textbooks, but also tailor it for their projects or for their research questions. So what matters is not to adhere to a fixed format, but whether this form can enable the researcher to answer the research questions and to attend to what's stake at the field. There are common types of templates. So there are descriptive analytical split, where you split the page, you separate the observation from interpretation. So you observe a certain phenomena in a social setting, and then you separate it and you interpret on the other side. Other type is jottings. You just have jottings to expanded notes. And it depends when you expand these notes. So you start with quick notes and then you expand the same day. Sometimes it's in the other day or not in the same site. And it happened depending on the role of the ethnographer. And I'll talk about it in one of the examples. Another type of template is a chronological log. So it's time-stamped. You record the events by time, but most of the time it's weak on meaning unless It's very specific for a specific project, but it's more strong for institutional ethnography and meetings. Reflexive field notes, and as you can see, there's a magnifier on it, so I'm going to define that later. What's the meaning of reflexive field notes? But it combines the observation with the position of the researcher, affect and ethics, and it usually makes the power visible, and it treats discomfort in a situation as data. I'm going to identify that later. There are spatial and visual field notes, while you can use maps, sketches, diagrams, and annotations. You capture movement, relations, and informality, but most of the time we write beside that, so we annotate also on the go. And there are also the hybrid and modular approaches, and I'll show you an example later on from one of my works that I combined modular and different hybrid approaches of templates, so context, thick description, and I'm going to define that later. But this is most common. This hybrid form is the most common. The meaning of reflexive notes that's here, as you can see here. So reflexive notes, it's not just like a normal field note. It's the note where you talk about your position as a researcher. Who are you in relation to this social setting? Your emotions at that time, your assumptions, and sometimes the contradictions that your expectations that went wrong. For example, your presence and how your presence shaped what is seen. Sometimes the presence of the researcher make the social setting inquiry like answers specific answers because of your presence. So sometimes you feel that and you record that as a reflexive field note. You feel that they're answering only the questions that you want to hear, for example, and that creates something called hidden transcripts. Like they hide some things because they are used to do that because they want to show a certain image or an example of this setting. So your presence, how the presence of this researcher shape what is seen, what is said, and what is possible. And they treat these notes, they treat the researcher as part of the field rather than outside it. And this is different from like interviews, from other methods where the researcher is already has an established position of an outsider. Not all the interviews. Not for sure, not all of the interviews, but most one-to-one interviews that are more formal interviews, the researcher is an outsider. But in ethnographic settings, the researcher is part of the field. Even if they only observe, sometimes their observation changes and shapes what is seen. So that directly goes to the reflexive field notes. And sometimes the power relations, they feel more powerful, they feel less powerful, and not always the researcher is in a powerful situation. Sometimes with elites, when you do elite ethnography, you will become less powerful, and sometimes this would freeze you from doing certain things, and this means that you can write that down and say this is a moment of discomfort during the observation, during my ethnographic experience, etc. And also, you can write that about the ethical tensions. Sometimes you question your ethical consents, and this happened to me in multiple projects. We did think about the ethical consent before going into the field, but then we're faced with so many problems and challenges in the field and ethical questions that we stop, we write about it, we talk about it, and most of the time I work within a team. So this is because I'm lucky, Alhamdulillah. I'm lucky to have like team, so we can discuss with my colleagues what we're facing, what's the problem, and in one of the projects that you will see. I didn't have an established team, but I have great colleagues who I can discuss with them and kind of understand what are these moments of discomfort, how can we do better, and all of that. So these moments of discomfort, the tensions, and the power relations in the field, these field notes make them analytically visible. So they render visible all of that rather than they say that it's just like methodological noise. There's a standard template that I can recommend for researchers and beginners. You can start with context, date, time, location, the weather, and your role. Were you an observer then? Were you a participant and a facilitator? And in the examples, I'll show you some examples of what I did where you can see my role, how my role changed. But most of the time I'm in between. I'm not always an observer. Then the thick description, and as you can see, the magnifier, this means I'm going to define it later. So the thick description, who's present, but also who's absent, who's not there in that situation. What are the repeated actions and routines? Sometimes the speech fragments and the way the people talk, the gestures, the silences, the spatial arrangements again. And I'll show you one of the examples where I studied the seating arrangement within a workshop, for example, within a workshop settings and the movements within the room. Then the researcher position, whether physically, where were you, where were you sitting, how people are responding to you, the discomforts that happen, the assumptions, and as I said earlier, moments of uncertainty. And then your initial interpretations, which can be expanded later after the site, what seems to matter here, contradictions, tensions, the questions raised, and then the links. And usually the links are if you were doing your research, doing literature review, you have read previous theories. You have also previous discussions, maybe you have a pilot, you have multiple observations alone, so you can connect to earlier observations while you are writing on a template, and then you think about emerging themes. Some of the people who are very experienced, they can actually find the emerging themes and analyze within writing the templates and within writing the thick descriptions, but not all of the, let's say, all of the themes, but the emerging themes can be easy to emerge while you're in the field. And then what to follow up next time, what to expand, what to explore more. For sometimes there are like themes that are reoccurring or themes that are strong enough that you want to expand and ask more and observe more maybe. But there is, I have to say, there's a caution here that I actually put it in yellow, that if you use this template in a very technical way, the ethnography turns into technique rather than it is an approach. So you need to understand that you don't do it as in a very like a checklist form. It's more of an approach. So thick description refers to the writing that goes beyond recording what happened. So you want to interpret what an action means within a social and cultural and spatial context. So it situates a certain behavior in relation to wider norms, power relations, histories, theories, symbols, and showing not just actions, but why they matter to those they involved. So without this contextualization and zooming out, descriptions remains thin and analytically empty. So I think I added examples, and I would like to read them in Arabic because most of the participants are in Arabic, but you have the English translation on the left. So a thin description: وصف رفيع. جلس مجموعة من الرجال وتحدثوا في الحديقة. الوصف الثيك ديسكريبشن الكثيف: كل مساء بعد المغرب في وقت يجتمع رجال كبار في السن في صفة على كراسي بلاستيك، وردوا فصلنا وين، قرب مدخل الحديقة، ويختارون مكانا بعيدا عن المدخل، يتحدثون عن الغلاء والبلدية وأيام زمان، في استخدام محسوب للحديقة كمساحة للجلوس دون إزعاج. هذا الجلوس فعل يومي بسيط لكنه يحمل معنى المطالبة بالحضور في فضاء عام منظم ومدار. I'm sorry if you can read it in English on the left. So this is a thin description and this is a thick description. I think I have also another example, but that maybe later on. Yeah. I really recommend this book. It's called Writing Ethnographic Field Notes. It's a series of guidelines and great advice for creating useful field notes in different settings. And also it has a lot of sketches to help. So I highly recommend this book. How long does ethnography need to be? So there's always this misconception that ethnography has to be for years or for long months. But there is no fixed minimum duration. But I really know that it's not days or like a hit and run, like it's very minimum visits to a site. No, what matters is that there is repetition and depth, not length alone. So ethnography requires multiple visits, but also deep observations and variation. So a single or one-off observations are usually not ethnography. They can be participatory, small workshops, yes, but not ethnography. A short ethnography can range from several days to a few weeks, but especially, I think the condition is that the engagement is intensive and you're being reflexive. So ethnography counts when practices are seen more than once and in context. So it doesn't have to be years as conventional ethnography. And by time, Parker Jenkins introduced the term ethno-case study. So ethno-case studies is the a shorter technique of doing ethnography, but it's more about a case that you want to do ethnography in. So you apply the ethnographic technique, but for smaller studies, and it can include an array of ethnographic methods, but it can be limited in terms of scope, time, in the field and engagement with the data. So, for example, if you're doing your master's degree, your PhD degree, and you want to do an ethnographic research, you can do an ethno case study, which is limited in time and it's good for small studies. How do we analyze such research? So we have field notes, but we use these field notes as analytical material. And as I said before, some of the researchers do when they work on the field notes, they analyze. So we treat notes as interpretations, not only as raw data. It's not raw data, but it's as interpretations. And if you did work on ethnography in the site with the field notes in a very deep way, the analysis would be much better. The quality of analysis would be much better, and you have to attend to the patterns, tensions, absences, and contradictions. While reading the field notes, you do something called analytical memos. You do it early and often. You can do it while you're in the field, and you keep doing that. And the memos can test ideas, you can pose questions, so you can go back and explore, and you track the emerging concepts. And then you code. But in ethnography, we don't extensively code. We don't do the coding a lot. We code selectively. And I'll show you an example later on. And then we can compare across time. This didn't happen in the last month. This happened. It's not going. And sometimes we go to the future and we do the predictions as well. Spaces, and we compare spaces, we compare time, we compare actors. Then we link observations to theory and concepts, revisit again the positionality and ethics, why I am saying this, why I am linking this to this certain theory, for example, and also analyze how my presence, my access, and also my exit sometimes. If sometimes you don't exit the site easily, and you kind of keep visiting the same site, and I did that with multiple projects, and I like that, and I'll talk about it later. And also you can ask and no, you problematize and question the relationships that you've developed, and how these relationships shaped what could be observed and said and what could not be said. And then you analyze through writing. Most of the ethnographic outputs are written and extensive, but there are other forms also that we can talk about. This is an example, another example, and if you allow me, I'm going to read that in Arabic, and in the left it's in English. A thin description. امرأة جلست على درج أمام بيتها في الحي. جلست على درج بيتي أمام بيتها في الحي. الثيك ديسكريبشن أو الوصف الكثيف، خلينا نحكي. في فترة العصر تجلس امرأة في منتصف العمر على درج بيتها المطل على الزقاق، تراقب حركة الأطفال والجيران المارين. هذا الجلوس اليومي ليس للراحة فقط، بل وسيلة غير معلنة للبقاء على صلة بالحي ومراقبته، في سياق تقل فيه المساحات العامة الآمنة للنساء. وجودها على الدرج يوازن بين الخصوصية والمشاركة، ويعيد تعريف حدود البيت والشارع في الحياة اليومية. If I want to take this specific field notes, and you can imagine that ethnography in general has extensive field notes, especially if you have a long-term engagement with a specific context. So you will have a lot of that thick descriptions within field notes. And as you can see, you can kind of code and think of certain themes about this. So from that description, this thick description, I have these themes that please allow me again, I'll read it in Arabic. الحدود بين الخاص والعام، الدرج كمساحة وسيطة بين البيت والشارع. الثانية النوع الاجتماعي والفضاء، كيف تستخدم النساء الفضاء اليومي بطرق مقبولة اجتماعيا. المراقبة والرعاية غير الرسمية، الجلوس كفعل متابعة وحماية للحي. الانتماء والحضور اليومي، البقاء مرئية دون احتلال فضاء عام رسمي. التكيف مع نقص الفضاءات العامة، حلول صغيرة لتعويض غياب مساحات آمنة. So this very minimal thick description gave me a lot of themes that I can talk about. But imagine having multiple field notes of similar to this field note, and that they have linking themes together. And when we say ethnography is hard, but it's when you see like reoccurring themes coming up, you would see that yes, it's hard and it's not easy, but it's very enjoyable to see themes like you can link themes from different field notes. I'll show two examples from my ethnographic work. And both of them, I think, ethno cases, but I have another example that I didn't show. And that the example that I'm not showing is the starting point for a project that I will show later on as an example of participatory research. So I'll talk about it later. I'll start with the first example. So this is an ethno case study at Seven Hills Park, Amman. This park is very famous because it's the first skate park in Jordan, and it hosts refugees and other users, of course, from different nationalities. The study was a socio-spatial understanding of refugees' urban experiences in the park. So I wanted to understand the social spatial dynamics and understanding of that public space. What did I do? So I took pictures, I wrote field notes, I did sketches, I did insight interviews, mapping and documentations. And mapping and documentation. So the temporality is important here. So I started with guest visits for a month. So I went every week in the weekend as guest visits. And then the remaining 3 months, after I established a relationship, I started to volunteer weekly. And this happened in 2019 as part of my PhD research. Sorry, 2019. As you can see, the main objective of this, and this was a chapter in my research, this sociospatial understanding of refugees included, I wanted to understand the meaning and perception of the park to refugees, the values given to outdoor experiences, and what are the obstacles and problems for their experiences outdoors. As you can see, this is a documentation, this is a plan. I'm sorry, it's pixelated, but and this is the functional zones over in that park. This is a template where I started that before going to the site, but the template has changed week by week and month by month. So it became more mature, and I started to add more recurring themes within it. So if you can see, maybe the smell, I added the smell, I added the conflicts discussed, and maybe I think it's walking with them. So you can start with the name, meeting number, and I call the meeting number. It's not a proper meeting. It was mostly an informal hangout in the park. The time, who came, where it started, and etc. So that was how I logged the field notes. But I have to say, I didn't log these field notes while I was at the park, because if you start writing field notes with the people in a very informal setting and in a park, it's going to be intimidating for them. So what I used to do is I went back directly to my car and started writing all of these field notes to keep. I wanted to be fresh directly out of the field or out of the park to start writing all of these notes. This is another way of logging and of logging all of these. So these are different visits, as I said, and it started with me as a guest and then as a volunteer. So I had multiple things. So this is a scene. I like to call it a scene. So we drank shai sheikh. It's camphor tea, I think, camphor tea with Akifa, and this is a pseudonym. So it's not the real name, of course, because they have to be anonymous. So you can see that there are some quotations that I used, direct quotations that I used from Akifa, the name of the Sudanese refugee here. And on the right, on the top right, you can see a field note that I wrote while, and it is reflexive. Yani, as you can see, I'm writing Akifa as a very warm person. She's talkative, open, comfortable. She wanted to share her experience, while Nadira was very skeptical at first. So I can also write about emotions, that she was skeptical of me at first because I'm a stranger. It's the first time that she sees me, for example, or she meets me, etc. And then this is part of the analysis. As you can see, before that, it's just logging, it's documentation. And then the analysis started. This is a usage pattern across age and gender. Where are the girls? Where are the boys? Where are the teenagers? And this is analysis. This is also analysis. It's about the simultaneous activities, like within the park, what's happening at the same time. And this is called an ethnographic scene. And this is show you how vivid, but also it can give you how the usage patterns in different parts of the park is doing. And this is ethnography, as you can see. And later on, multiple analytical, let's say analytical lenses were produced, but I'm just showing you, and I don't want to consume all of the time talking about one case. This is also another, let's say, output. It's a collage of the objects. So while visiting the park, I figured out that the users bring objects from home. As you can see, multiple objects were brought from their home. It could include like Sudanese products, and some of the women were selling these products, balloons for a small child birthday, bamboo chairs from home, collected leaves so they can do their tea. So it's mugwort tea, sorry. And then music speakers so they can listen to music. And this can also show how comfortable they are using this park and how accessible this park feels to them when I later on compared it to other parks that I studied. The other case study is different, and it's in a different nature. So it's called practice-led research, and it was also part of my PhD research. So it's not about an outsider or an observer looking at people using a space. It's the main aim was to seek knowledge through practice. So this technique is usually adopted from creative arts and design research, and some of the people call it, I think, I hope I'm not wrong, that it's institutional ethnography. So it's concerned with the operation. So how does this practice operate? And if we understand that and we get closer to the operation, we advance knowledge about and within practice. So it's practice based. So what I did is it's called researcher in residence. And for me, I wanted to explore the role of an actor in Amman who produces a public space and understand the barriers and strengths and potential for them as practitioners to accomplish inclusive designs. And that was my main objective being at the office. So I wanted to understand these different actors, but also recognize to see if they recognize that there are diverse users and how inclusive they are. Yeah, so in my research in residence, my positionality was I wasn't a guest, and I also wasn't a total insider. I wasn't a full-time employee, but I wasn't a total outsider as well. I was a temporary team member. So I spent 3 days a week for 6 weeks with the team. Who I worked later on with them in a longer project, but this was for my PhD. So I was part of the design team. I was provided with a desk, and I had the access to the library and all of that. So I wanted to show you what exactly my position was in that sense. But I also was with another PhD student. But both of us are doing ethnography, but we were in two different positionalities. So I was a team member. I was part of the different stages of the project, as you can see. But the other PhD student who was doing an ethnography, she was a total outsider. So while in the meetings, I was working and writing notes about the project, and we wanted to do like tasks and all of that. As a designer, I was an architect at that moment, but she was an architect, but she wasn't. She was writing field notes, reflecting on what's happening in the meeting. So both are ethnographers, but with different positionalities and with different research questions, but also with different modes and techniques. Before the field work, I did this like random table. What am I going to do? How am I going to understand all of these research questions and understanding how does this operate? How does this actor operate? So I had this table while looking at that. I want to do interviews with the team members, interview with the head of the firm. I want to observe the process. I want to be part of the process, etc. And this is showing you how ethnography can incorporate multiple methods, but you don't incorporate it spontaneously. You have to have an underlying logic of why you're incorporating certain methods and not others. As you can see, I had this an insider but also outsider lens on the project. So I was the architect. I was also the urban designer working on this project. As you can see, we did multiple tours around the sites. So we had a log. This is part of am I an insider, but at the same time, I was an outsider, writing field notes about the same project. And then I started mapping findings related to my research questions. As you can see here are some parts where there are refugees, they weren't involved, etc. As I told you, the analysis. So you can see here, this is one code, one theme, and how did I get to this theme? Was I analyzing to, and that led me to that theme. So as you can see, it's called a multimodal transcript, where you have all of these different transcripts, whether from the interviewing the team members or the head of the firm. These are interview transcripts, and then we have some project documents, different images of communications, and the implicit meanings and annotations of these images, and my reflexive field notes. All of them together, I created these different codes, let's say, and then these codes merged together have the sub-theme, for example, identifying as participatory in concept, not participatory in reality, disappointing input, not design-oriented, and then I code that. It becomes symbolic participation, sub-theme, theme, barriers, and weaknesses. This is the form of analysis. Now, I'm going to talk about participatory research overview. And as I said earlier, you can't cover all ethnography in one session. So this is like a snapshot of that. Let's talk about participatory research overview. So what exactly is participatory research? Participatory research, it's a strategy towards praxis, and it has to be defined as collective and also self-reflective inquiry, but it's undertaken by people in their own social situation, but also about their own social situation. The participatory research came and had this central epistemological shift to talk and to ask and question about who produces knowledge. So the knowledge here is co-produced, and the participants who were the objects of research, we as a researcher looked at them as objects of research, they are now the subjects of inquiry. So people participate in deciding what to investigate and what questions to ask, how information is gathered, and how it's organized and used. And usually the components of participatory research, we have three components. We investigate, the social investigation, the education, both the researcher and the participants learn from each other, and then the action, it has to change. We have to instigate change in such research. Whether it's a small change or a big change, it doesn't matter, but there is an idea of change. These elements they don't work in a linear manner. They're very dynamic. So each component informs the other, but also different participatory projects put emphasis on the three different emphasis on the three activities. Some projects that I'll show later focus on action more than education. Some focus on education more. So the activities occur in a variety of combinations and concentrations. However, most of the conventional models of participatory research assumes that a community-based group already exists, and this group identified a problem. So this is the original and conventional way of looking at participatory research. They said that there is a community, and this community found and identified a problem. So they gathered together to try to find solutions, and sometimes they call and request a researcher. But in practice, this is often not the case. So as you can see, this is a conventional model. So previous models are unclear how they're requesting this researcher, and how does it happen for an individual who is unknown in the field. So they request this actor, and then they start the process. They form a small group. They look at the design of the research. They collect data. They analyze it as a team, and they implement change plans. But this is not normal. This is not the case. Not the usual case. So Patricia Maguire responds to this. And for example, we have Tandon's model. The previous one is Tandon's model. And she added this step called entering, experiencing, establishing relationship with actors and situation. So what exactly what I mean exactly here is that Maguire added this step that the researchers sometimes have an interest in a certain context. So they enter, they experience and establish relationships with these actors in a situation. I'll give examples in a bit. So this is, as you can see, this is the revised model of Maguire. So this is the request. So this community group that formed, instead of requesting a researcher, the researcher comes already, enter and experience and establish relationships in the site. So in this formulation that Maguire added, it begins with entry. So most of the participatory research projects today follow this logic implicitly طبعا. They don't explicitly name that, but they form this logic. So it begins with open-ended engagement and entry rather than clearly defined problems from the community. And there is a huge focus on relationship in such studies, the relationship buildings and all of that. Yeah. So the process here, as I said, it's a social investigation, action, social investigation and action and education. But it's usually starts with four, and and later on they call it the spiral. So it starts with planning. We plan for the project, or it can start with reflect or act or observe. So there isn't a specific starting point, and different textbooks started differently. So the research has four moments of action. We plan, action, observe, act, observe, and reflect. And I'll talk about it more. And this is an example. So we reflect, the certain group reflect and identify a certain project. They plan on how to examine not a project, sorry, there is a concern or a question. They plan how to do it, they act, and then they observe after the action. And then they reflect again, and cycles go on and on. I have an example so we can understand, but the example has two scenarios. So the first scenario is a community-based group identify the problem. So the example is, let's talk about waste accumulation. So residents in a neighborhood, they notice an increasing waste accumulation in shared alleys and near building entrances. Scenario one is that the residents begin discussing the problem. So they can talk together informally and realize that they lack clean information about why this accumulation persists. The researcher entry, the group contact a local researcher to help understand the problems. And nowadays, it's happening in the university. So we have a group of women wanting us to do a design of a public space for them at the university. So it's happening, but it's not very common. And then scenario two is that the researcher already has interest in the same context. So the researcher enter the neighborhood with a broad interest in everyday living conditions, or in a certain research question, or an interest in general in a problem, but not a predefined problem. So through informal conversations, walking the area, listening to residents, the researcher notices that the residents complains about the waste accumulation. So they together share these observations back. So he shares or she shares the observations back with residents, asking whether this reflects their experience, and they invite discussions. They do collective reflection and then decision to proceed. So what they do is they go back to plan. So I changed the scenarios here. The scenario tell here, it's community-based identified the problem, but in scenario two, the researcher had this interest in mind, and then he or she, the researcher, formed this research problem with the residents together and reflected together, and they started to plan. So the group here now decides to document these waste patterns over 2 weeks, for example, speak with residents. The action is they want to observe, to take photos, to do informal conversations, and then they observe. So the waste is most severe on the certain days, certain spots, etc. Cycle two now, after they do that, they reflect. The group reflects on the findings. They know causes and disagreements. They plan again. They co-develop small actions, for example, creating shared reminders or organizing a collective cleanup. They act, and then they observe that the cleanliness improved, but still the awareness still needs to be increased. Cycle three, they observe, they reflect, and then they discuss whether to adapt, repeat, or stop actions, and the cycles go on and on. Um, in this research, one of the hardest thing is that the researcher has an expanded, unstable set of roles. So sometimes you're an educator, you're an organizer, you're a facilitator, you're a listener, you're a supporter, advisor, and sometimes instigator. And I always write, actually wrote about it in one of my papers, that you have to be sensible in order to work as a participatory researcher, because it has many other things than what we're trained to do in research and education. You have to be a better person also, and to think clearly about entering and exiting the sites. And most of the people have this problem of that we either facilitate, but sometimes we do direction harshly. So we direct the research, and it's crucial to balance both of them. And there is risks of preaching in the name of social change or empowering, for example. So there is a tension between we enable the reflection versus we steer the outcomes in a way that we want. And it happens, but with experience and intention, it can differ. Also, decisions about what issues to raise, when to raise them, and how to frame them are difficult, and that's here comes the ethical concerns emergence in the field. Choosing not to raise an issue can reproduce silence, but also raising it too strongly can close down discussions or impose external agendas or different agendas. Also, in other research methods, some would say this is not valid, or this is, but in participatory research, it's these tensions are not failures. It's highly messy. So there are structural conditions of participatory research. These tensions are structural conditions, and they must be treated as part of the method. What types of data do we produce in both ethnography and participatory? It's heterogeneous data. And I always say that if you want to work on participatory research methodologies, you have to master the first methods at first. Or if you're a beginner, you can practice, because it includes all of that. It includes all of the methods. What data it generates? It generates field notes, transcripts, workshop outputs, and sometimes reports and reflexive notes, policy reports sometimes, maps, drawings, photographs, recordings, and collective discussions. These materials have to be inseparable from the context, and this is an important thing to talk about. Especially, I talked about how thin descriptions are. And also, organizing data requires reflexive documentation. While you're organizing, you have to reflect on the go. Why did you put this with this? Why did you start with this instead of this? All of that. So contradictions that's happening are not noise, they are analytically significant. So sometimes the discomfort, the tension, the contradiction, they're all significant, they're all findings. And sometimes having no findings is a finding. How do we analyze? Analysis in participatory research is iterative and relational. So you don't start with a point and start in a linear way. It's iterative. You keep doing that. And it begins during fieldwork, as I said earlier. And analysis is not the sole domain of the researcher. You don't do analysis yourself, only you. Because you started a project with all of these people, you have to end it with all of these people, and they have to decide, like you, on what to do with this data and how to present it. So the participants' interpretations, disagreements sometimes, and refusals are part of the analytical process. And these disagreements, sometimes it will be disappointing for you. They would disagree to write on a certain topic. They would disagree to talk about a certain topic. And you have to understand that they know better for their social settings than you as a researcher. One important note to talk about is that when you have all of this raw data and you want to understand it and interpret it, just interpreting that means that you have the power. So interpretation is where power concentrates. So scholars have long noted that researchers decide what becomes public, how it's written, and what counts as an interpretation. How can we overcome that? So we need to discuss with the participants that we participated with what can be made public. We have to share drafts. And we're kind of, in my latest project, we're kind of doing that. And we're having tensions as well, because they want things to be presented and elaborated more. And we want other things to be more elaborated more. So it has to be a discussion, a back and forth discussion. Working together in case narratives, creating spaces such as workshops, for joint sense making. So most of the time we do workshops to create criteria, to understand, to analyze, workshops to design. So multiple workshops to understand and to give them the power to decide with you. But this doesn't eliminate power from the researcher. Till this day, every project that we work on has different, let's say, power dynamics, and you can't give all the power. You as a researcher is still we have this culture of giving the researcher all the power, and sometimes not the researcher, but the organizers, the institutions they're affiliated to, or sometimes funders have all power in certain situations. So researchers should be careful not to impose meanings while claiming to empower others, and praxis-oriented research becomes reifying when interpretations are given by researchers and not negotiated by participants. So at this point, I want to say something that I also write about in my research a lot, that it's important to name a defining feature of it's important to talk about that the process matters way, way more than the outcome. So so Harney describes it as if we want to talk about the research as a box, so it's not collecting the ideas and placing them neatly into a box for later analysis. It's the experiment among the uncontained. So the box can't contain them. So it's an experiment among the uncontained. You can't contain all of that. It's a snapshot. It's also a situation. So it's the process matters more than the outcome. And you would see in the examples now that the process matters way, way much more. And another thing that's really important before we proceed to the examples, that some insights remain partial. So you will never have the bigger picture. So, and I call it crystallization. Like it's like a crystal. You look at the certain situation from different sides, and you'll have new understandings and insights every time you look from different angles. So, and also some relations are unfinished. Some meanings resist being fixed, and they have multiple meanings. So you don't have to fixate the meaning. It can have multiple meanings. Analysis is then in such cases is not about a total capture, but it means that you recognize what can be responsibly, and I would say responsibly interpreted, and what must remain open. Also, outputs can be academic and non-academic, especially for academic researchers. I'm giving you this hint that non-academic outputs in participatory research are way, way, way more important than a journal paper, because the people in the community won't bother reading your journal paper and the formal English or formal Arabic, let's say, language in a journal paper, but they would like more other like modes of engagement and communication back to the community. It could be a workshop, it could be other techniques, and I'll show you some examples of what I do. Examples of my participatory work. I'm aware that I only have 6 minutes. I'll try to be fast. So one of the first participatory project. This project was happily funded by CBRL. So this was my first participatory project. But this project is the continuation of the method that I did in the PhD, but I didn't discuss. It was an ethnographic method to understand refugees in a certain neighborhood. And then later on, I applied for this funding to act. So it was the social investigation at first, and then we started to act. The main aim of this project is to look at public spaces as tools and arenas of sociocultural integration. So this project had multiple methods. It started with, we had creating workshops of creating collages, cartography, creating workshops, creative writing workshops, knowledge exchange sessions, and other like outdoor trips and storytelling. I'll show you multiple, and there are trips so refugees can start going outside to the other neighborhoods, but also I wanted to familiarize and normalize and going outside. But the plan was they implemented this, they planned this plan and we implemented together. So we tried to create knowledge through experience and performance in these spaces. As you can see, these are a series of going out and about and collecting things, understanding things, and connecting that back to their home countries. And then this was a knowledge exchange workshop where we gathered all of what we've been doing and we started to communicate that back to different partners, as you can see. These partners, some of them are responsible for what's happening in the outdoors. For example, the Amanat Amman, GAM, Greater Amman municipality, and all of that. And as you can see here, the seating plan was considered as well in the workshops. These are the knowledge exchange workshops with different partners and refugee representatives. This output was non-academic, so this is we did this collaborative mapping of this neighborhood while we were looking in a different lens about a specific site. So as you can see, this is the souk, which is the most important souk that they use. But we made this map out of scale, so it's not to scale. So this souk was widened because of the importance. And the blue part is the safe spaces at night. So this is a counter mapping technique where we are looking at the map in a different lens. And also, all of the key, as you can see, these are different spaces, Iraqi, Syrian shops that represents them and all of that. And these are the mental maps that created that. So this is a 3-day workshop to talk about to make the map. And what I want to show here is that this specific map, even when I left the site, it generated other maps. So the community themselves, later on, they did their participatory work. They started working on the same map and they produced two to three maps, and then they took it to Al Balad, to the downtown, to another location to do the same map in a different space. So I just want to say that these outputs are not just outputs, they are generators of different outputs later on. Another non-academic output was, for example, a block at CBRL, so not necessarily it's a researcher output. Another thing was the report. So this report, we call it Informing Practice Report. This report is in a very simple English. It's bullet points on how can we enhance refugees' usage in public outdoor spaces. So this report, I gave that to the Refugee Community Center. In 2019, they took these findings, applied for a funding, and happily they secured partial funding to do this garden where we did our exhibition. So as you can see, the outputs don't stop there, and some changes are happening just because of one researcher, then the team, and then the community together, and then the research keeps going on and on and on. It has this butterfly effect, as we can see. And as you can see, we're family in the exhibition. As the people like the process rather than this, maybe the exhibition as an outcome, as a non-academic outcome. So the exhibition had all of the works done in the workshops, the findings, some collages, the works, and we had a person with a musical instrument, oud, and it was nice. But also we celebrated this garden that was secured and funded because of that report. But this wasn't planned. So the Refugee Community Center applied for a separate funding. They secured this garden. We did the exhibition there. Another project with a different scope. This project was funded by OSF, Open Society Foundation, and it was run by IIED, and I was consulting for IIED then. The project was written by my colleague Dina Dajani. So Dina had this idea in mind, and then me and Dina had together to recruit a team. So the team, they were refugee researchers themselves. So the community researching their own community. And we're kind of facilitating, helping and collaborating, to be honest. So we had multiple roles as well. And this project is looked at the priorities of urban refugees within the city. So we wanted the refugee researchers themselves to research their communities and look at the priority that what they think as priorities. So we started with context analysis. So as you can see, the team and I, and also we had a member from KHF King Hussein Foundation, IRC King Hussein Foundation. We started looking at, we did a context analysis of what are the visible reports now, what are they talking about, what are they focusing on. So it was, for example, health, sociocultural aspects, etc. And then we selected a group of people where we wanted to do interviews with. They were refugee-led initiatives. We started interviewing them to understand why they initiated such initiatives and how can we relate that to these priorities that we found. And then we did this art-based workshops to look at what priorities, and the art-based workshop is a participatory workshop. We had 5 art-based workshops in a month and 1 week. So we had 50 refugee participants in total. And as you can see, this pyramid has like 4 sides. Each side, we first picked this, for example, this side is for all refugees. And then each table decided these 3 specific groups. So some of them said we want to dedicate this for handicapped refugees. Others said we wanted female refugees, Yemeni refugees, Ethiopian refugees at some point. And some of them said for people who are seeking hope. So they decided who are the people or the group that we want to talk about their priorities. And they started putting all of these tags so we can see what's upside the pyramid. And then we had some time, so we analyzed all of that, and we gathered together in this community participation event. We hired a space, and it was a very nice event where the 50 representatives came, and we kind of described and discussed what happened. We invited them back to talk about all the challenges and priorities we found. And as I said before, there is a spiral. I'm not showing it. So there is a spiral. We're now applying for phase 2 of all of that. We picked one priority out of this and sub-themes, and we're working on it. The outcomes weren't academic. So one of this is a blog also. And then we have a policy informing report. And from that report, we're going to pick one priority and sub priorities with that. And one output was a caricatures. So these caricatures want to highlight the urban refugee scheme or what priorities they want to talk about. I'm not sure if I have the spiral here. And then I want to end. So currently I'm working on one of the largest projects that I worked on, but CBRL is a partner, and I think we're going to do maybe a seminar soon. It's called Surfacing Zarqa, and you can see the website of the project. The project is huge with a lot of partners, and maybe it's participatory, and it includes ethnography as well. It includes oral history. So maybe in the coming time we would discuss this project and expand because it's one of the largest projects I'm working on, and I would love to reflect and have more dedicated time, and also give the space for my colleagues who are many in this project to talk about it. And I'm going to step the share, Dr. Rudaina. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.